art
Robert
students,
Norman Ross
speaking
was
of
an
cute,
American
got together
painter
to
and
build
art
some
teacher best
happy little
known for
clouds
creating
and
and
happy
hosting
little
The Joy of
trees.
Painting,
Yeah,
a
with
TV
sky blue
show
shirts,
that aired
big
from
auburn wigs
1983 to
everywhere.
1994. The show was broadcast on PBS in the United States, CBC and Canada, and similar channels across Latin America, Europe and other places. With his distinctive hairstyle and kind personality, Bob Ross became one of the most well-known figures of the 1980s. Ross spent over 10 years teaching people all over the world how to paint on TV. Sadly, he died at just 52 years old from complications related to lymphoma on July 4, 1995. His popular art instruction show had ended just over a year before his death. After 403 episodes, Bob Ross was famous for his soothing voice and the way he encouraged people to embrace their mistakes, calling them happy little accidents. He mainly taught viewers how to paint landscapes in a simple, calming way. Recently, 30 years after his passing, Bob Ross's family has shared new information about his life, career and the financial situation behind The Joy of Painting. Stay tuned to learn more about these hidden details of Bob Ross' journey. Early life. Bob Ross was born in Daytona Beach, Florida to Jack and Ollie Ross. Jack worked as a carpenter while Ollie was a waitress. Ross grew up in Orlando, Florida. When he was a teenager, he took care of injured animals including armadillos, snakes, alligators and even squirrels. One of these squirrels later made an appearance in several episodes of his TV show. He had a half brother named Jim, whom he briefly mentioned on his show. Ross left high school in the nth grade, and while working as a carpenter with his dad, he lost part of his left index finger. Despite this, it didn't affect his ability to hold a palette when he painted in 1961. At the age of 18, Ross joined the United States Air Force and started as a medical records technician. He eventually reached the rank of Master Sergeant and became the first sergeant of the clinic at Eon Air Force Base in Alaska. It was there that he first saw the snow-covered mountains, which later became common theme in his paintings. Ross developed his quick painting style during short breaks at work. During his time in the military, he had to be tough, giving orders and enforcing discipline. He later said that after he left the military, he decided he would never raise his voice again, wanting to leave behind the harshness that came with those duties. Career. During his 20 years in the Air Force, Bob Ross became interested in painting after he attended an art class at the Anchorage Uzo Club. He often found himself disagreeing with many of his instructors who preferred abstract styles. Ross would say things like, "They'd tell you what makes a tree, but they wouldn't tell you how to paint a tree." While working part-time as a bartender, Ross discovered a TV show called The Magic of Oil Painting, hosted by a German painter named Bill Alexander. Alexander used a painting style from the 16th century called alla prima, which is known as wet on wet. This technique allowed him to create a painting in just 30 minutes. Ross studied this technique carefully and became skilled at it. He started painting and selling Alaskan landscapes on novelty gold mining pans, and soon the money he made from selling his art was more than what he earned from his military job. In 1981, he retired from the Air Force with the rank of Master Sergeant. After retiring, Ross moved back to Florida. He studied painting further with Alexander and joined his company, Alexander Magic Art Supplies Company. Becoming a traveling salesman and teacher, an artist named Annette Kowalski attended one of his classes in Clearwater, Florida, and encouraged Ross to start his own business with his wife and the Kowalskis. They pulled their savings to create Ross's company. In the beginning, the business faced challenges. Ross's signature permed hairstyle actually came about because he wanted to save money on haircuts. His usual crew cut was becoming too costly. He later admitted that he did not like the hairstyle but felt stuck with it because it was part of the company logo. In 1982, a station in Falls Church, Virginia recorded one of his art classes as a pilot episode. Within the first year, 60 PBS stations picked up the show. In 1983, Ross was drawn to PBS station WB in Money, Indiana, where he was promised creative freedom. He felt a strong connection with the staff there. Although he moved back to Florida in 1989, he continued to travel to Money every 3 months to tape new episodes of the show. Ross said that he worked on the show for free, earning his income from how-to books, videotapes and art supplies. The Joy of Painting aired from January 11, 1983 to May 17, 1994, but reruns are still shown in many places and countries today, including on the digital sub-channel network Create and the streaming service Hulu. In the UK, the BBC aired episodes again during the COVID-19 pandemic. While many people were at home in lockdown, in each half-hour episode, Ross taught viewers the quick wet and wet oil painting technique. He painted a scene directly from his imagination without sketching first and explained the limited colors he used, breaking the process down into simple steps. Artist and art critic Myra Shaw compared Ross to Fred Rogers, the host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, noting that both had soft voices and spoke at a slow pace. With support from the Kowalskis, Ross used his television show to promote a line of art supplies and recorded classes, building what became a $15 million business called Bob Ross Inc. This company later expanded to include classes taught by other artists who learned his techniques after Ross's passing. The Kowalskis took over ownership of the company. Bob Ross also filmed a lot of wildlife, especially squirrels, often in his garden. He had a big heart for animals and frequently rescued injured or abandoned squirrels and other small creatures. Many of these little animals found their way onto the canvases in the joy of painting during his lifetime. Ross created an estimated 30,000 paintings. Even though there are so many original works, they are quite rare in the art market. When they do come up for sale, the prices for his paintings usually start in the thousands of dollars and can often exceed $10,000. Major auction houses have never sold any of Ross's artwork, and the company Bob Ross Inc. still owns many of the paintings he made for the joy of painting. Ross was against turning his art into a way to make money, believing that art should be appreciated rather than treated as a financial asset. One of Ross's early television paintings, titled A Walk in the Woods, was sold during a pledge drive shortly after the first season of the show. As of September 2023, this painting is owned by Ryan Nelson, an art dealer from Minnesota. He bought it from its original owner and has been the main seller of the few Bob Ross paintings that have been available in the open art market. Nelson has listed this particular painting for an asking price of $9,850,000 and has mentioned that he has other plans for it if it does not sell at that price. Unlike more traditional and famous artists, Ross's work is described by an art appraisal service as a mix between fine art and entertainment memorabilia. His paintings are mostly sought after by fans of the joy of painting rather than wealthy art collectors. Most of the Bob Ross artwork that collectors have comes from his earlier works. Before he started his television show, Ross used a wet and wet oil painting technique, which means he painted over a thin layer of wet paint. This method allowed him to keep painting without having to wait for layers to dry. He used a limited selection of tools and colors, which made it easier for beginners who didn't want to spend a lot of money on expensive supplies. Ross often suggested using odorless mineral spirits for cleaning brushes by combining the wet and wet method with larger brushes 1 and 2 in size and painting knives. Ross was able to quickly finish a landscape scene. He typically painted 3 versions of nearly every painting shown on his program. The first version was painted before filming and placed on an easel off camera for reference. The second version was the one viewers saw him paint during the episode. After filming, he would create a more detailed version of his instructional books. Each version was marked on the side or back of the canvas. Kowalski for the initial version, TV for the one painted during the show, and book for the version used in his books. In the first episode of the second season of The Joy of Painting, Bob Ross dedicated the show to Bill Alexander. He expressed his gratitude by saying, "Years ago Bill taught me this fantastic wet and wet technique, and I feel as though he gave me a precious gift, and I'd like to share that gift with you." However, as Ross became more popular, his relationship with Alexander started to become more strained. In a 1991 interview with the New York Times, Alexander claimed, "He betrayed me. I invented wet on wet. I trained him and he thinks he can do it better." Art historians have pointed out that the wet and wet technique, also known as alla prima, actually has roots in Flanders from the 15th century. Many famous artists like Frans Hals, Diego Velázquez, Caravaggio, Paul Cézanne, John Everett Mle, John Singer Sargent and Claude Monet have used this technique. Bob Ross was known for his signature phrases that he would often repeat while painting, like "Let's add some happy little trees." In most episodes he would mention how much he enjoyed cleaning his paintbrush. He had a playful way of dry off his brush, striking it against a can of odorless thinner and then against a box or a trash can. In later seasons he would occasionally hit the brush hard against the trash can, jokingly saying he hit the bucket, and then he would strike the brush on the easel. He often smiled and laughed as he playfully stated that he was going to beat the devil out of it. Ross also used a lightly sanded palette to reduce reflections caused by studio lighting. In each episode Ross typically wore jeans in a plain light colored shirt. Believing it was a timeless style, he spoke as if he were addressing just one viewer, making the experience feel personal. When asked about his calm and relaxed approach to painting, Ross once shared a letter he received from someone who said, "Bob, everything in your world seems to be happy." He responded, "That's for sure. That's why I paint. It's because I can create the kind of world that I want, and I can make this world as happy as I want it." Shoot, if you want bad stuff, watch the news. The landscapes he painted, which often featured mountains, lakes, snow and log cabins, were inspired by his time in Alaska, where he spent most of his Air Force career. Ross believed that everyone has natural artistic talent and could become a skilled artist with time, practice and encouragement. He famously said, "We don't make mistakes, we just have happy accidents." In 2014, the blog 538 analyzed 381 episodes in which Ross painted live and found that 91% of his paintings featured at least one tree. About 44% included clouds. 39% showed mountains and 34% depicted mountain lakes. Ross estimated that he completed more than 30,000 paintings during his lifetime. Interestingly, his artwork rarely included human figures or signs of human life. On the rare occasion he painted a cabin, it usually did not have smoke coming from the chimney, suggesting it was likely unoccupied. The joy of painting had a significant impact on art education, particularly for beginners. Before Bob Ross, art instruction was often seen as inaccessible, requiring formal training or a special kind of talent. Bob's approach challenged that notion by making painting something anyone could do. He broke down techniques step by step using simple language and an encouraging demeanor, which demystified the process of creating art. One of the most important contributions Bob made was to emphasize that mistakes were part of the artistic process, what he famously called happy little accidents. This approach encouraged people to embrace imperfections, which helped alleviate the fear of failure that often holds back aspiring artists. By presenting painting as something approachable and forgiving, Bob attracted a wide audience, including those who might never have considered themselves capable of creating art. Bob's method of teaching focused on immediate results, which is particularly motivating for beginners. His wet and wet technique allowed viewers to complete a painting in under 30 minutes, providing a sense of accomplishment in a short time. This instant gratification was key in keeping people engaged and motivated to continue learning. The influence of the joy of painting extended to formal art classes, where some educators incorporated elements of Bob's philosophy into their teaching methods. Art instructors began using his videos as a tool to introduce oil painting, and his stress-free approach inspired many educators to rethink how they taught art to beginners. Bob's legacy lives on in the many people who took up painting because of his show, proving that the barriers to learning art could be broken down with the right mindset and approach. Bob had a deep appreciation for country music. In 1987 he was invited to join Hank Snow on stage at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee. The audience welcomed him with a huge ovation. At first Ross felt a little nervous, but he lightened the mood by cracking a joke which helped him feel more comfortable. Later on, Hank Snow received a private painting lesson from Ross, showcasing their friendly connection. Ross often traveled to New York City to promote his hardcover book, The Best of the Joy of Painting with Bob Ross, where he shared his painting techniques with a studio audience. One notable visit was in 1989 when he appeared on the Joan Rivers Show. He returned again in 1992 for a live show with Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee Gifford. In 1994 he made an appearance on the Phil Donahue Show, where he invited 5 audience members on stage to do some painting together. Donahue even took a turn at painting during that episode, adding to the fun. In the early 1990s, Bob Ross participated in several promotional spots for MTV. According to the American City Business Journals, these spots fit perfectly with Generation X's growing interest in things that were ironic and retro. Sadly, in 1995, a visibly ill Ross made his last public television appearance on the pilot episode of the children's series The Adventures of Elmer and Friends. This series premiered in 1996, 1 year after Ross passed away. In that episode there was a heartfelt message of thanks from Ross to his fans and viewers, along with a musical tribute that honored his legacy. Personal life: Bob Ross was married 3 times and had 2 children. One child was from a relationship he had as a teenager, and his son Robert Stephen Steve Ross was born from his first marriage to Vivian Ridge. Steve was also a talented painter and sometimes appeared on The Joy of Painting. He became a RAW certified instructor and was featured in the last episode of season 1. In that episode he read a series of how-to questions sent in by viewers, and Bob answered each question one at a time, demonstrating various techniques until they completed an entire painting. Unfortunately, Ross's marriage to Ridge ended in divorce in 1977, reportedly due to Ross's infidelity. His second wife Jane did not have any children with him. She passed away from cancer in 1992. In 1995, just 2 months before his death, Ross married for the 3rd time to Linda Brown. Steve Ross, Bob Ross's son, has long been recognized as a skilled landscape painter, perhaps even surpassing his famous father in talent. Much of Steve's life was deeply influenced by his father, including his love for painting, his passion for nature, and even his calming voice. One notable difference between them, though, was their hairstyles. While Bob Ross sported his iconic red perm, Steve had umber curls with a mullet. Steve's bond with his father was evident whenever they appeared together on The Joy of Painting, where Bob's pride for his son was clear. Raised primarily by his father after the death of his mother, Steve shared a close relationship with Bob, and the two used painting as a way to cope with their grief. This eventually became a lifelong passion for both of them. Steve's first appearance on The Joy of Painting was in the final episode of the first season, where he nervously read viewer questions while his father painted. He would later grow into his role as a painter and instructor, traveling across the country to teach his father's techniques. He eventually became a certified Bob Ross instructor and more comfortable in front of large audiences. However, after Bob Ross passed away in 1995 due to lymphoma, Steve struggled with depression. Losing his motivation to paint, the loss of both of his parents left him in deep emotional pain, and he withdrew from the spotlight for over 15 years, unable to continue painting because it was so closely tied to memories of his father. It wasn't until 2019 that Steve found his way back to painting publicly alongside his lifelong friend and fellow Bob Ross instructor Dana Jester. Steve held a painting workshop in Winchester, Indiana. The event was a huge success, drawing crowds of fans and painters alike, and it reignited Steve's passion for teaching. Since then, Steve has continued to hold painting classes in places like Tennessee and Colorado, and he remains dedicated to sharing his father's wet painting technique. Reflecting on his return to painting, Steve admitted that he was surprised by the overwhelming support and interest from fans. Teaching again felt like the first time I've had the sun on my face in 1,000 years, a fitting sentiment for someone who had once turned away from the very thing that defined his connection to his father. Bob Ross was known for being quite private and secretive about his personal life. Some of the few interviews that shed light on his life were included in the 2011 PBS documentary Bob Ross, the Happy Painter. Additionally, many of his private conversations were destroyed as part of a legal settlement between his family and Bob Ross Inc. This company continues to be very protective of his intellectual property and privacy. Even today, Ross did not belong to any specific organized religion, but he often expressed his belief in a creator God. He frequently ended his shows with a warm wish, saying God bless to his viewers, highlighting his caring nature. Death. Bob Ross was a cigarette smoker for most of his adult life, and over the years he faced several health problems. He often expected that he might not live long. Sadly, Ross passed away at the age of 52 on July 4, 1995 in Orlando, Florida. The cause of his death was complications related to lymphoma, a type of cancer. At the time he died, he had already prepared 7 paintings for what would have been the 32nd season of The Joy of Painting. Ross was buried at Woodland Memorial Park in Gotha, Florida. His grave is marked with a plaque that simply says Bob Ross, television artist. Interestingly, Ross kept his lymphoma diagnosis a secret from the public. Only his family and close friends knew about it until after he passed away. According to the rules of Bob Ross Inc., when a partner in the company dies, their shares are divided among the remaining partners. When Ross died, he had a partner, his second wife, who also passed away. This left the Kowalskis, who were primarily interested in using Ross' name for selling painting supplies, as the sole owners of the company. They were reportedly quite aggressive toward Ross's family and friends, trying to pressure him to sign over rights to his estate before he died. However, Ross had different plans. He wrote the Kowalskis out of his will, leaving his estate along with the rights to his name and likeness to his son Steve and his half-brother Jimmy Cox. The Kowalskis argued that most of Ross's work was done as a work for hire, which meant he had no right to bequeath anything. In the end, the Kowalskis won the lawsuit against Ross's estate. After the Kowalskis retired, their daughter Joan Kowalski took over the company. She was more open to expanding the Bob Ross brand beyond just painting supplies. This led to a resurgence in marketing his name starting in the 2010s. Joan also worked out a settlement with Steve Ross and Jimmy Cox that granted Bob Ross Inc. the rights to Ross's name and likeness. In return, it was agreed that Steve Ross could continue his art career without the fear of being sued, which had largely kept him from painting publicly. After his father's death, Joan Kowalski even commissioned a revival series of The Joy of Painting using the paintings Ross had planned for season 32, with Nicholas Heckins, a certified Bob Ross instructor, as the host. Legacy. Bob Ross's likeness has woven itself deeply into popular culture, becoming a recognizable symbol that has been parodied and referenced in numerous television shows, films and video games. Programs like Family Guy and The Boondocks, as well as movies such as Deadpool 2 and The Games, might have all included nods to Ross, showcasing his enduring influence and charm. To commemorate what would have been his 70th birthday, Google featured a special doodle on October 29, 2012, illustrating Ross painting a scene that creatively depicted the letter G against a serene landscape backdrop. Additionally, a board game titled Bob Ross: The Art of Chill was launched and made available at Target stores alongside a Kia pet modeled after his life, further highlighting his cultural impact in the realm of gaming. There was an intention to release a Bob Ross video game for the Wii, Nintendo DS and PC developed by Bragg Entertainment Group. Although this project ultimately did not come to fruition, a renewed interest in Ross surged in 2015 with the launch of Twitch Creative to celebrate what would have been his 73rd birthday. Twitch hosted a 9-day marathon of the joy of painting. This event attracted an impressive 5.6 million viewers and led to the creation of a weekly rebroadcast of one season of the show each Monday. In a generous gesture, Twitch promised to donate a portion of the advertising revenue to charities including St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. In June 2016, Ross's series Beauty is Everywhere was made available on Netflix, featuring 30-minute episodes taken from the later seasons of the joy of painting. This surgence in popularity caught the Kowalskis by surprise, since they managed Ross's image and the show's episodes. They capitalized on this interest by launching a Bob Ross YouTube channel, which quickly gained over 1 million subscribers within its first year. As the demand for Ross's paintings increased, questions arose about the whereabouts of the many works he created for the joy of painting. An investigative report by the New York Times revealed that the Kowalskis still held onto all of the paintings, although lacked the proper storage conditions typically necessary for art preservation. In 2019, 4 of Ross's paintings were acquired by the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, with one being displayed to the public in 2021. In 2020, the makers of Magic: The Gathering announced a limited release featuring Bob Ross paintings adapted for the card artwork, further cementing his influence in popular culture. In August 2021, Netflix released a documentary titled Bob Ross: Happy Accidents, Betrayal and Greed. This film delved into Ross's life, career and legacy, shedding light on the controversies surrounding the Kowalskis and Bob Ross family. Additionally, in 2021, Bob Ross Inc., in collaboration with Running Press Kids, published an official children's book biography titled This Is Your World: The Story of Bob Ross, written by Sophia Golds and illustrated by Robin Bowen. This book shares Ross' life story and how he rose to become one of America's most beloved painters. The 2023 film Paint features Owen Wilson playing a fictional character inspired by Ross, further extending his cultural legacy. After just a few minutes of watching and listening to Bob Ross as he paints at his easel, anyone who has even a little interest in painting starts to believe they can create their own piece of art. If you are feeling stressed, Ross's calm voice and friendly attitude really help to make you feel better. When the joy of painting with Bob Ross was on PBS from 1982 to 1994. There was no criticism, only a world of possibilities. He made art seem friendly and easy, encouraging everyone to give it a try. Now, many of Ross's paintings, including 75 original pieces that have never been shown to the public before, are on display at the Best Bower Dunn Museum in Libertyville. It's an experience, said Alyssa Ferris, who is the education director for the Lake County Forest Preserve District that runs the museum. The show does not do these beautiful pictures justice. Ross, who sadly passed away in 1995, would start each of his 30-minute episodes with a blank canvas and finish with a peaceful landscape scene. Over nearly 400 episodes, he shared helpful tips and encouragement as a beautiful image slowly, soothingly appeared on the canvas. What's so fantastic about this is that anybody can put a little masterpiece on canvas, Ross would say while painting a shiny island in the wilderness for the first episode of season 29. Millions of fans, even those who were born after the show ended, became familiar with Ross's wonderful art. What many viewers might not know is that Ross often made 3 versions of the same painting: one he painted as a reference off-screen, another that he completed in about 26 minutes during the show, and a third, more polished version that he used for his book series at the Dunn Special Exhibition. 3 screens show an episode of the show next to the actual paintings Ross created during those episodes. There is also a fun mock TV set where visitors can wear a wig that looks like Ross's famous curly hair for a selfie. Ross's calming presence on screen also led to an unexpected connection with the ASMR Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response community. ASMR describes a pleasant tingling sensation triggered by specific visual or auditory stimuli, and many viewers found that watching Ross's gentle painting tutorials induced this response. In the 2021 Netflix documentary, Steve Ross shared that his father adopted a soft-spoken style partly as a reaction to his mentor Bill Alexander's harsher tone. Ross aimed to create a soothing experience for viewers, particularly since his audience was predominantly female. This approach became one of his signature traits. Joan Kowalski, president of Bob Ross Inc., noted that Ross was essentially the godfather of ASMR, indicating that people were drawn to his show for ASMR reasons even before the term became widely recognized. Ross himself acknowledged that he was aware of viewers who enjoyed his show for non-instructional purposes and were supportive of this use. He humorously remarked about those who would doze off while watching the joy of painting, saying, "I love hearing that you've never watched a full episode of me, Bob." Ross's deep connection with nature was Evident in nearly every episode of The Joy of Painting, his artwork primarily focused on natural landscapes, mountains, lakes, forests, and clouds, and the serene scenes he painted reflected his appreciation for the beauty and tranquility of the natural world. Ross often spoke of nature with reverence, attributing almost a spiritual quality to the landscapes he painted. Ross' approach to nature was not just about capturing its beauty on canvas, it was also a reflection of his philosophy on life. He often referred to painting as a way to escape from the chaos of everyday life, and his depictions of tranquil landscapes conveyed a sense of peace and harmony that resonated with many viewers. He wanted people to feel at ease, and his art provided a mental retreat into an idealized version of nature where people could find solace and respite. Although Bob Ross was not explicitly vocal about environmental activism, his love of nature influenced many viewers to develop a greater appreciation for the outdoors. His paintings highlighted the importance of preserving the natural world and fostered a sense of connection to it. His gentle commentary on the beauty of trees, rivers, and animals in their natural habitat inspired viewers to value and protect the environment. This influence made Ross an informal advocate for environmentalism, inspiring people to see nature not just as a backdrop for human activity but as something worth protecting and celebrating. Ross also incorporated wildlife into his paintings, and his commentary often depicting happy little critters or mentioning animals as part of the landscapes. He conveyed a strong sense of interconnectedness between the various elements of nature, encouraging viewers to see themselves as part of that ecosystem rather than separate from it. Through his show, Bob made people feel a personal connection to the environment, fostering a sense of stewardship even if he did not frame it as environmental activism. Bob Ross' legacy continues to inspire countless people to pick up a paintbrush and express their creativity, reminding everyone that art is for everyone. His soothing voice and positive attitude create a lasting impact, encouraging us all to embrace our own happy little accidents in life.